Welcome everyone to Dovii Forum and to another episode of Global Affairs Digest. And today we are going to do a reaction to another video from Abhijit Chavda, and it's called Will America Help India in War with China? So this video is doing the rounds and it's creating quite a buzz. So let's get into it. So my Dovii family, before we get into this video, which is titled Will America Help India in a War with China? I hope this never takes place, but this is a hypothetical question, which means they are assuming, will America help India? So what are the conditions that would take place or could take place in the near future? This is what this video is all about. This is what I assume. So let's get into it. 3, 2, 1, and go.
Imagine there's a hypothetical future war between India and China. And imagine that India finds itself in a situation where it has to ask the US for help. The question is, will the US be willing to help India? And the answer is, yes, the US will be happy to help India. But this help will come with strings attached. The US will demand
there will be conditions,
a number of conditions in exchange, in return for this help. So what could these conditions
I'm curious too.
Please subscribe and let's
I'm very curious too.
This video is brought to you by my geopolitics course, Geopolitics from
Let's see.
Principles. The link is in the description below. So first of all, why would India and China go to war hypothetically in the future? Well, that war would be initiated by China. China is the
I hope that never happens.
India-China relationship. India does not claim any Chinese territory. India does not threaten China. It's China that claims Indian territory. It's China that has been, for the longest time, threatening India consistently. So if a war does break out, it will be initiated by China. So let's say there's a war. And in what situation, in what scenario would India have to go to the US and ask for help? Well, in this hypothetical future war, such a scenario would happen if India was in danger of losing significant amount of territories and India's very existence, India's very sovereignty were threatened. Only in such a condition would India go and ask the US for help. So it's mainly about territorial loss, significant territorial loss. And the Chinese, typically, if they go to war with India, they would seek to capture the whole of Arunachal Pradesh. They would seek to capture definitely Tawang. Tawang is very much on the agenda. And they would seek to capture other Indian territories further westwards. So that would be the Chinese objective. And India would have to go to the US if significant amounts of territory were in danger of being captured by the Chinese. So let's say India goes to the US and the US agrees to help India but gives a list of conditions. What could these conditions be like? Well, first of all, the US will want US military bases in India along the northern.
That's what they do.
A number of US military bases. They would want full access and control of a number of Indian military bases in this region. They would need Air Force bases as well, airstrips, landing strips, all that. And they would also demand access to certain naval bases, ports.
So you have
and
army
eventually
base,
they would want,
naval
once the war
base,
is over, that this presence in India, US
army
military base in
bases.
India, becomes permanent and troops and equipment are permanently stationed in India. So that would be the condition they would give to India, that India has to agree to these conditions for US help. But that's just the first condition. In American sanctions against Russia. You're surprised? Of course they would ask for that. So India should participate in US sanctions against Russia.
No, not at all surprised.
Stop buying Russian oil. India should stop buying Russian weapons and arms.
They're asking for that even right now.
must allow the US to inspect the Russian weapons it has in its arsenal so that the Americans can understand the Russian technological capabilities. If India still had INS Chakra, the Akula class submarine, nuclear attack submarine, the Americans would have demanded access to that as well. But that's no longer with the
Very
Indians.
much like the British
So
Straits.
that's about Russia. These would be the demands vis-a-vis India and Russia. Then they will demand they would demand complete access to India's nuclear program. They will demand complete access to India's missile program. And they will lay down the condition that there should be no further development of nuclear weapons. The Indian nuclear weapons program needs to be frozen. That will be their demand, a key demand. And then they will say that since we are asking you to freeze and essentially dismantle your nuclear program and your ballistic missile program, so in return for that, we will station our nuclear weapons with our missiles
Not happening.
on your territory.
It's an American
they will essentially
dream.
offer India the same deal they have offered
Can't happen.
Japan. The benefit of the protection of the US nuclear umbrella. And Japan also benefits from this. And then the US will demand that India becomes an official, a formal US military ally, so that it can benefit from US protection, just like Japan does, just like Australia does, and so on. So India will have to become formally a US military ally, which comes with a whole host of conditions. There's a lot of fine print in that treaty. That's what India will have to agree to. Then they will talk about the Indian economy. They will demand that India opens up its economy and its market to the US, to US companies. They will want unimpeded access to the Indian market. There should be no more trade and tariff barriers, which is kind of a sore point between the two nations right now. They will require that entirely US owned companies be allowed to open up in India. Right now, there are rules. If a foreign company wants to set up base in India, they need to have a joint venture with a local entity, and there's a cap on what percentage of the new company the foreign entity can own. So that will have to be scrapped, and India will have to allow entirely US owned companies to set up base in India. Then they will want the Indian market, the Indian economy to be consumption based, not production based. And India should export services instead of goods and products that are manufactured. And if India does manufacture goods and products, then those need to be manufactured for the benefit of the US and Western market. And the manufacturing should be done by US companies, US owned companies based in India, and the profits should be allowed to go back to the US. So that's about the economy. What next? Well, next, they will require that India should normalize relations with Pakistan and offer certain concessions to Pakistan. For example, reimpose.
So basically only one-sided gains
A small concession
to one
just
country,
to,
not the other.
Make Pakistan feel good and make it feel like, yes, now we can talk to India and normalize relations. So that will be a key demand of the US to normalize relations with Pakistan and reimpose, let's say, Article 370 in Kashmir. Next, they will say, roll back the FCRA curbs. FCRA means Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. So that's an act of the Indian government by which companies that register for this, that are registered for FCRA and who have FCRA licenses, they can receive money from abroad, from other countries. So typically it's NGOs that receive money from abroad. Typically it's think tanks that receive money from abroad, and so on and so forth. So you have to be FCRA registered. You need to have an FCRA registration or license. So of late, the Indian government has been clamping down and cancelling the FCRA registrations of a number of NGOs and think tanks and all that. So typically these NGOs, they serve foreign interests. They're typically, let's say, religious NGOs that conduct large-scale religious conversions in India, conversions to foreign religions. There are think tanks that further the agenda and the national interest of foreign powers at the expense of India, and so on. So India has been clamping down on this. India has been cancelling the FCRA registrations of a number of these entities, NGOs, think tanks, and all that. So the US will say, roll back all of these FCRA curbs, allow everybody to receive money from foreign countries, essentially the US. Next, the US will require the right, they will demand the right to to conduct unimpeded subnational diplomacy in India. So what is subnational
Don't
diplomacy?
forget to like, share and
Subnational
subscribe to my
diplomacy is
channel.
when US
Okay?
officials, typically diplomatic officials from the embassies, from the embassy and consulates, etc., they engage with local politicians in various Indian states one-to-one. So it's all about, essentially about interfering in the internal affairs of India, and they typically engage with politicians and political parties that are typically opposed to the central government. And it is also alleged that the US may have allegedly funded and created entirely new political parties in India. So they will want the right to do more of this. Unimpeded, unobstructed access and right to indulge in such activities. That's what will be demanded.
So basically become a vassal state for the United
Allow
States.
US experts to sit as advisors for the Indian education system. So obviously the Indian education system is very
Okay.
flawed, it's very backward, it's very primitive compared to the US. So the US will offer India the benefit of its experts to reform the education system. So they will want to correct the curriculum, let's say, in subjects like history and so on. They will want to promote the superior American values.
Must be a joke.
Essentially,
That's
it
what
means
happening.
promoting what's called woke ideology and all that. So they will want that to happen. So they will demand the right. They will demand access to the Indian education system. They will want their experts to be taken as advisors, policy advisors, curriculum advisors, and so on. And all of these demands, they will require that India sign a formal treaty agreeing to all of these terms. India will have to officially and formally sign a treaty with the US, agreeing to all of these terms. And the text of the treaty will not be made public, but the treaty will be binding because India has officially signed it. And the US military presence that will happen in India in such a hypothetical scenario, this US military presence will enforce this treaty. So after a few months, after the war is over, if India feels like, okay, now we don't want to do it, that won't be allowed. The US military presence will ensure that the treaty is enforced. All right? So now do you understand why India is a genuinely sovereign nation today? Because India does not have to do any of that. No nation can demand all of these terms and conditions of India. That's why India is a genuinely sovereign nation. Take a look at the Chavda Index of Hard Power, which is going to be released soon. This is the top 20 nations in the world. If you look closer, you will see that only 4 of these nations, the top 4, are fully sovereign nations. Their sovereignty risk is low and their sovereignty score is above 1. Out of more than 190 nations in the world, only 4 nations are fully sovereign. It's the US, it's Russia, it's China, and India. And all the other nations have a sovereignty score of less than 1. How did I calculate this? Well, if you want to understand, check out my course. The link is in the description below. So that's what it means to be a sovereign nation. And in case India suffers a setback in a future hypothetical war with China, India could end up losing its sovereignty if it has to go to the US and ask for help. Such help will be given in exchange for almost complete loss of sovereignty. So India will be forced to hand over its destiny to the US. For example, like the UK, like Australia, like all the NATO members, all the members of NATO, like Japan, like South Korea. Each of these cases is slightly different. Japan is under complete US occupation and so on. But there you have it. So in case such a scenario does play out, then India will, in exchange for US help, have to hand over its sovereignty to the US and hand over its destiny to the US. And let's say India does hypothetically agree to such terms in a hypothetical future war. Then what does the US do after India signs on the dotted line? Well, in the US will obviously first of all send their troops, their aircraft, their naval ships, warships and all that to the bases that they want to occupy in India. And then they will conduct, after a while, some diplomacy with China. First, they will allow China to grab some territory, a reasonably large amount of territory. Then they will once all the troops and aircraft and all that are in place and nuclear weapons are in place, they will conduct diplomacy with China. Tell the Chinese, okay, now this is the red line. We are here now. India is now under our protection. You need to back off. And the Chinese will back off because they will have gained some territory and they will essentially have gotten what they want, perhaps. But maybe the Chinese also may not have calculated that such a big new risk will appear almost at their doorstep. So it could end up doing more harm than good to China. But for India, the harm will be in such a hypothetical scenario, fictitious scenario, the harm for India will be incalculable. So that is a completely fictitious hypothetical future scenario. If India has to go to the US for help, this is what will happen. And it's not some imaginary scenario that I'm
going to be
this has
incalculable.
happened throughout history. Welcome to the real world. This is how the world works. Take a look at how the British Empire expanded in India after it captured a toehold in West Bengal. Through these means, one of the straightforward examples is Manipur. In the early 19th century, Manipur was conquered and occupied by the Burmese Empire, and the king of Manipur had to go to the British to ask for help and protection. The British were very happy to come to his aid, to the aid of Manipur, and offer their protection to Manipur. And they installed a political agent in the court in Manipur, in Imphal, and they also signed a treaty with the Burmese. And this entry of the British into this matter was the beginning of the downfall of not just the kingdom of Manipur, but also the kingdom of Burma. Both were annexed, occupied, and essentially destroyed, and they are both still suffering from the lingering effects, horrible lingering effects of British rule. So that is what can happen. That is kind of the worst case scenario. So India has to ensure that such a scenario never comes to pass. India, I have already laid out 5 things India needs to do to ensure that China behaves and ensure that there is no war between India and China. One of the things is a nuclear deterrent, and we have a very good nuclear deterrent in India. I'll not go into the details of that, but India needs to do more. We always need to do more. So remember this, India has no friends, India has no military allies, India is entirely on its own, and that is what it means to be a sovereign, non-imperialist nation. You are entirely on your own. But that's how it should be if you want to be a sovereign nation. So that's the situation. Get used to it. And that's about it.
So that's the video all about. Now again, I would like my viewers to know this is a hypothetical question. Will America help India in war with China? And I feel personally, after watching this video is well thought of. In a sense, these things have happened in the past as well. And America and the West have a history to show in this regards. Now, very well put. India, we got to take it as India has no friends, we have no allies, we're by ourselves. Which is why it comes to another very important aspect. They say if you want peace, nobody wants war, but if you want peace, you got to be prepared for war. And that is what I think India is doing. That is what most of the countries are doing. Japan, Europe, everyone. Because they see the imminent threat that is at their doorstep, and that's China. Now, what my viewers need to know, that relationship between India and China has been strained ever since we had those clashes at Galwan and things like that. My personal view is that India would never go to the USA for any kind of help in this regards. And that is the reason why we are working towards being self-sufficient and not reliant on others for arms and ammunitions. And I thank the government for the initiative of Make in India, which is proving to be really good, and it's taken off. It's a hit. This is what I would say, it's a hit. It's doing a wonderful job. Now, very closely monitored what I seen in this video. He mentioned 4 states that are actually truly sovereign states, that you can actually call fully sovereign states, namely Russia, China, US and India. And we can actually see that in the way things are run in the current scenario with the affairs of the world, where these 4 states, they don't bow down to anybody. They have their own independent foreign policies, which most nations, the remainder of the nations apart from these 4 nations, do not have. They always tend to align with a particular side or a particular country or a group. India has always stood its ground of being non-aligned. Now, I will go step by step. He mentioned certain details about bases being given, conditions, the conditions that Americans could put. Bases, military bases, naval bases, air bases. I don't think that is ever going to take place. Russia, again about Russia. Now many people talk about, especially after the Russia-Ukraine war that is taking place, even currently. India's stand is very simple. We condemn the war, but it doesn't mean that we have to take sides over here. We have to put efforts where we try and calm both sides down so that the war stops. And you can see those results. The kind of stand India is taking, you can see the results. Both Ukraine and Russia, they want India to solve the issue. Both have come to India and they want India to see how best India can play a role in ending this war. And I don't think this war is going to last long, because we have elections around the corner and it's pretty clear who's going to come in power. Once that happens, you will see a major role that India will be playing in this regards, in trying and ending this war rather than this war prolonging. Now, they spoke about the nuclear program. India's got a very advanced nuclear program in place, and I don't think under any circumstances would India forfeit its nuclear arsenals on the basis of any promises made by the West or even America, because we clearly seen what happened in Ukraine. Guarantees were made, but Ukraine is still in war. Their territories are occupied and things like that. And we have our neighbors, we have 2 neighbors who are nuclear powered, and a sad story, both have certain grudges with India. So I don't think the program would ever be put on hold, frozen or even done away with. Now coming to the next point is trade. So that is a classic British style of actually ruling the world, where the trade is only one-sided, it benefits only one side and not the other. So these things where India is made to export services rather than products, that's not happening again, because we are, as I said, we are already heading to be one of the top manufacturing hubs of the world. And you see our growth index, it's the highest. No country has touched that right now. India is on a roll and there's no turning back right now. So coming back to the core issue over here, when we say, will America help India in a war with China? It was an hypothetical question put out. We're not saying these things will happen. Neither am I saying these things will happen. Okay? But we are saying if such a scenario takes place in the near future, what kind of conditions could the Americans put to India in order to help India? So I feel these are very genuine points that he raised, and these are the kind of points that America usually puts to countries. So we as a very matured nation, we see that, and that is the reason we do not rely on anybody's support. We have a very robust armed force, all three, Army, Navy and the Air Force, one of the strongest in the world. Our equipments, military equipments are advanced, and we are getting more advanced equipments as we speak right now too. Every day you'll get to hear news about new purchases being made or new technology that has been invented and it's going into production very soon. So these things you will keep hearing day in and day out, and that shows the kind of mind frame the country is in, the leadership is in, and the direction in which India is going. Having said that, I pray that there is no war between the two nations, because these are two Goliaths of the world, India and China. There should never be a war. There will be losses on both sides. Nobody is going to win a battle if should there be a war between the two nations. So, but as a wise man said, if you want peace, you got to be prepared for war. So let me know how you like this video, and like, share and comment. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and let me know what kind of videos you like me to react to, what videos you like me to make, and I will definitely go ahead and make them for you. Till then, take care, bye.